On the morning he turned 18, Ethan expected one thing, and one thing only. His father would place the century-old signet ring into his hand, congratulate him for becoming the next heir of the family, and everyone gathered inside the mansion would applaud. That was how it had always happened. Every firstborn son before him had inherited the family legacy on their 18th birthday. Every portrait hanging along the grand hallway proved it. Every story told around the dinner table confirmed it. Every relative had reminded him since he was a child that this day would define the rest of his life. Instead, his grandmother slowly walked toward him carrying a carefully folded silk dress. The room became so quiet that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. She smiled as if nothing about the moment was unusual. Then she placed the dress into his trembling hands and softly said, "Congratulations. Today, you become our daughter." No one laughed. Not his father, not his mother, not his younger brother, not a single cousin. Instead, every member of the family stood to their feet and applauded. Ethan stared at them, waiting for someone to admit it was a joke. Nobody did. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. "What is this?" His father stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "It is our oldest tradition." "I don't understand." "You will." Ethan threw the dress onto the floor. "I'm not wearing that." His grandmother calmly picked it back up, brushed away the invisible dust, folded it once again, and looked directly into his eyes. Every heir has said those exact words. What? Every single one. A cold chill ran through his body. He looked toward the portraits lining the walls. Every painting showed proud men dressed in expensive suits. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing suggested what his grandmother had just claimed. Then she pointed toward the oldest portrait in the room. "Look closer." He walked over. At first he saw only a handsome young nobleman wearing formal clothing. Then he noticed something strange. The artist had painted incredibly delicate hands. The face carried soft feminine features. The eyes looked almost identical to his own. His grandmother whispered behind him. "That portrait was painted before the ceremony." "What ceremony?" "The one that changed everything." Ethan slowly turned around. "I don't believe any of this." "You don't have to." "Then why tell me?" "Because by sunset, you'll understand why every firstborn son in this family willingly became the eldest daughter." His heart raced. Willingly. None of them regretted it. His father finally spoke. "I fought harder than you." Ethan laughed nervously. "No. Seriously." "I am serious." "You expect me to believe you wore dresses?" "I expected never to tell you." Silence. Ethan searched his father's face for any sign of humor. There wasn't one. His father continued. "The first day, I hated every second. And now, I'd relive it 1,000 times." That answer frightened Ethan more than anything else, because his father wasn't embarrassed. He sounded grateful. "What happened to you?" His father smiled sadly. "I learned who I really was. I already know who I am." "So did I." His grandmother gently lifted the dress again. "It isn't about pretending." "It sure looks like pretending." "No." She stepped closer. "It is about understanding." Ethan shook his head. "I refuse." The old woman nodded. Every heir refused. "So then what?" "Then life convinced them." "I'm leaving." He marched toward the front door. It didn't open. He pulled harder. "Locked." He looked back. "Open it." His father quietly replied. "It won't." "You locked me in?" "No." "What do you mean no?" "The house did." He laughed. "That's ridiculous." His grandmother looked toward the enormous staircase. "The house only opens after the first lesson." "What lesson?" "The one your great-great-grandfather learned 123 years ago." Ethan rolled his eyes. "This is insane." "I know. I'm calling the police." He pulled out his phone. No signal. He walked toward every window. Nothing. Even the internet had disappeared. His younger brother finally approached him. "I wish it had been me." Ethan stared. "What?" "I've waited years to see your ceremony." "You knew." "Everyone knows." "And nobody told me?" "It isn't allowed." "Why?" "Because if you know too early," He hesitated. You spend your whole childhood afraid. Ethan swallowed. This is some kind of cult.
No.
His brother smiled gently. It's our family. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like the only stranger inside his own home. Hours passed. No one forced him to wear the dress. No one threatened him. No one even argued. Instead, they continued preparing dinner as if nothing unusual had happened. That somehow made everything worse. Finally, curiosity defeated anger. He walked into the library where his grandmother sat reading an ancient leather journal. What happens if I never wear it? She closed the book. You eventually will. Why are you so certain? Because every answer you want is inside these pages. She handed him the journal. The cover read simply, "The first daughter." He frowned. This family never had daughters. She smiled. That's what everyone outside believes. He opened the first page. The handwriting looked impossibly old. The opening sentence froze him. If you are reading this, then today you discovered the greatest lie our family ever protected. He kept reading. I was born Edward Ashford in 1903. By my 18th birthday, I expected to inherit my father's estate. Instead, my grandmother handed me a blue dress. I hated her for it, exactly as you probably hate yours now. Ethan's breathing became slower. The words felt strangely personal, almost as if the writer somehow knew him. The journal continued. I believed becoming the family's eldest daughter would destroy my life. Instead, it saved it. Not because clothing changed me, because understanding people changed me. The tradition was never about fabric. It was never about appearances. It was never about pretending to be someone else. It was about learning something every leader desperately needed but could never truly understand from a distance. Compassion, humility, patience, the ability to see the world through different eyes. Ethan looked up. His grandmother was watching him carefully. So, this is some psychological experiment? She smiled. Keep reading. He continued. For 1 year I lived publicly as Eleanor. Not hidden, not ashamed. I experienced kindness from strangers, cruelty from strangers, respect I had never noticed, disrespect I had never imagined. I discovered how quickly people judged appearances, how differently they listened, how differently they interrupted, how differently they trusted. When the year ended, I finally understood something my father had spent decades trying to teach me. Power without empathy always becomes cruelty. Empathy without courage changes nothing. A true leader must possess both. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. This can't be real. His grandmother asked quietly. Why? Because nobody would agree to this. They wouldn't. So, they never agreed. They were forced.
No.
They chose after understanding. He looked down again. Several pages contained photographs. One showed a confident young woman standing beside a vintage automobile. The caption underneath read, Edward Ashford, 1 year later. His mouth slowly opened. No. Another photograph. Another. Every firstborn heir appeared transformed, smiling, confident, proud. None looked miserable. None appeared ashamed. The final picture made Ethan's heart stop. It was his father, young, wearing an elegant evening gown beside his grandfather, laughing, completely genuine. Ethan stared for what felt like forever. His father walked into the library. I wondered when you'd reach that page. You never told me. I wasn't allowed. Were you happy? His father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up the old photograph. I was terrified. Then I met people who had no idea who I used to be. And they treated me according to what they saw. Was it hard? The hardest year of my life. So why smile? Because it was also the most important year. Ethan looked at the photograph again. You don't regret it. Not for 1 second. His father sat beside him. When I returned, I became a better son, a better father, a better husband, a better businessman. Not because I wore different clothes, but because I finally understood experiences that had always been invisible to me. Ethan stayed silent. His father continued, "You don't have to become someone else. You only have to become someone wiser." Outside, thunder echoed across the sky. Rain began striking the old mansion windows. His grandmother quietly stood. The storm always arrives on ceremony day. "You knew it would rain? It has rained every ceremony for more than 100 years. That's impossible." "So is today." She smiled. "But here we are." Ethan looked once more at the folded silk dress resting beside the journal. Only hours ago it had looked ridiculous. Now, it looked like the beginning of a mystery far larger than he had ever imagined. And for the first time since morning, instead of asking how he could escape, he found himself asking the one question every heir before him had eventually asked. What happens after I put it on? What happens after I put it on? The question escaped Ethan's mouth before he realized he had spoken. His grandmother didn't answer immediately. She simply smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take. I didn't say I'd wear it."
"No."
"You only stopped asking how to leave." Ethan looked away. She was right. Only a few hours earlier, every thought in his mind had been focused on escaping the mansion. Now his curiosity had quietly taken control. His father leaned back in his chair. "The first lesson has already begun. I haven't done anything. You've listened. That isn't a lesson. It is if you've never truly listened before." Ethan folded his arms. "So, what happens if I put it on?" His grandmother picked up the journal again. "The story continues. I don't understand." Neither did Edward. She opened another page. The ink had faded with age.
It read,
The dress itself held no power. The power came from the promise. Once I accepted the tradition, my family stopped protecting me from the world. For 1 year I would walk through life without the privilege my family name had always given me. No servants. No inherited fortune. No special introductions. No one would know I was the Ashford heir. I would earn every conversation, every opportunity, every friendship, every ounce of respect. Only then could I deserve the family legacy. Ethan looked up. "So that's it?" His grandmother nodded. "That's it. I thought this was some ancient curse." "It is."
"What?"
"The curse of believing life is fair because you've never seen it from another perspective."
He sighed.
"This still feels extreme." "It is." "So, why not just volunteer somewhere?" His father laughed quietly. "I asked the same question. And my grandfather said volunteering lets you visit another person's world." He paused. "This tradition makes you live in it." The room fell silent again. Ethan hated how reasonable that sounded. He had expected manipulation. Instead, he kept receiving answers that forced him to think. His grandmother gently placed the folded dress on the table. "You don't become our daughter because we're eject sons. You become our daughter because one day you'll lead every son and daughter who depends on this family." Ethan stared at the fabric. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. No punishment.
"No."
No exile.
"No."
No losing the inheritance." His father answered. "The inheritance isn't money." "What is it?" "Wisdom." Ethan laughed. "That's convenient." "It is. But wisdom is also much harder to fake." Dinner that evening felt strangely normal. His mother talked about the garden. His younger brother complained about university exams. His aunt argued about dessert recipes. No one mentioned the ceremony. No one pressured Ethan. The silence itself became unbearable. Finally, he slammed his fork onto the table. "Will someone please explain why everybody acts like this is normal?" His mother looked at him kindly. "Because for us." She smiled. "It is. Weren't you shocked when Dad went through this?" "I cried for 3 days. Then why let it happen to me?" "Because I saw who he became afterward." His father looked embarrassed. She continued. "When we first met, your father interrupted everyone. He assumed he was always the smartest person in every room. He dismissed opinions he didn't understand. He judged people before knowing them." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "Seriously?" His father nodded. "I was awful." His mother laughed. "You really were." "What changed?" His mother looked into Ethan's eyes. He came back different. He listened before speaking. He noticed when people felt uncomfortable. He apologized without making excuses. He became patient. She reached across the table and gently squeezed Ethan's hand. I fell in love with the man who returned. Ethan didn't know what to say. His father smiled. The first version of me inherited wealth. The second version earned a family. Late that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The mansion was silent. Moonlight spilled across the long hallway lined with portraits. He walked toward them again. Something about the paintings bothered him. During the day, they looked ordinary.
Now,
they looked different. He stepped closer to the oldest portrait. This time he noticed something hidden beneath the frame. A tiny brass switch. He hesitated, then pressed it.
Click.
The portrait slowly swung open like a secret door. Behind it was another painting. Ethan froze. Instead of Edward wearing a suit, the hidden portrait showed Eleanor. Elegant, confident, beautiful. The resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't another person. It was the same heir after completing the tradition. His pulse quickened. He hurried to the next portrait. Another hidden switch. Another secret painting. Then another. And another. Every single male portrait concealed a second portrait behind it. Each heir. Each transformed. Each smiling more naturally than in the first painting. He walked farther down the hallway. His father's portrait.
Click.
Behind it stood a graceful young woman wearing an emerald evening dress. His father's smile in that painting was brighter than any photograph Ethan had ever seen. A voice behind him nearly made him jump. I wondered when you'd find them. His grandmother stood in the shadows. Why hide these? To protect the promise. From who? From people who only understand appearances. Ethan looked back at the portraits. So, everyone who inherited this family. She nodded. Every single one. For over 100 years? For much longer. How long? She smiled. Long enough that nobody remembers who started it. He shook his head. This is unbelievable. She walked beside him. Look carefully. He studied the paintings. One detail suddenly stood out. Every transformed portrait looked peaceful.
Not forced.
Not embarrassed. Not pretending. Peaceful. Why do they all look happier? His grandmother answered softly. Because every one of them stopped performing the role the world expected. What does that mean? It means strength isn't always loud. It means confidence doesn't require proving yourself. It means compassion is never weakness. She looked at the portraits with pride. Each one entered this hallway believing they already knew who they were. And they left knowing who everyone else was too. The following morning, the dress still rested exactly where she had placed it. Ethan stared at it for several minutes. His mind argued with itself. This is ridiculous. But what if there's more? You're actually considering this? Why is everyone so calm? Why does nobody regret it? Questions replaced certainty. His grandmother entered carrying 2 cups of tea. You didn't sleep.
No.
Neither did I during my ceremony. You were the heir? She laughed. No, but I watched my older brother. What happened to him? He became my older sister for a year. Ethan blinked. So, the traditions skip generations? It follows the firstborn heir. What was he like before? Proud. And after? Kind. That's a big difference. It changed everything. She handed Ethan a small wooden box. Open it. Inside lay dozens of handwritten letters. What are these? Read one. He unfolded the nearest letter. It began, Dear future heir, if you're reading this, you're probably convinced your family has lost its mind. I thought exactly the same. My name doesn't matter. You'll know my face from the portraits. I only want to tell you one thing. The hardest part isn't wearing different clothes. The hardest part is realizing how many opinions you formed without ever questioning where they came from. You'll meet people who challenge every assumption you've ever made. Don't run from them. Listen. The year passes faster than you think. When it ends, you'll never see another human being the same way again. Ethan picked up another letter. Then another. Every heir had written one. None complained. None warned him to escape. Instead, they all repeated different versions of the same message. Keep an open mind. Don't judge too quickly. The first month is the hardest. You'll thank them later. His grandmother watched quietly. They wrote those voluntarily. I can see that. We never ask. He placed the letters back into the box. I still don't know if I can do this. She smiled gently. You don't have to know. You only have to decide. He looked again at the silk dress. Yesterday it had represented humiliation. Today, it represented a question. Who would he become if he stopped worrying about who everyone expected him to be? For the first time in his life, that question frightened him far more than the dress ever could. And deep inside, where pride and curiosity were beginning to battle for control, curiosity was slowly starting to win. Ethan stood alone in front of the mirror for nearly an hour. The dress remained folded on the chair behind him. Every few minutes he glanced at it, then quickly looked away again. He had always believed confidence meant making decisions without hesitation. Now he wasn't so sure. Maybe confidence was admitting that you didn't know. A gentle knock echoed through the room. His mother entered without saying a word. She carried a wooden case no larger than a jewelry box. I brought something. I'm not ready. I know. She placed the box on the bed. You don't have to open it today. What is it? It belonged to your father. Ethan looked up. My father? She nodded. He left it for you years ago. Before I was born? The day after he completed the tradition. She quietly left the room. For several minutes, Ethan simply stared at the box. Finally, curiosity won. He opened it. Inside rested a simple silver bracelet. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Just a thin engraved band. Wrapped around it was a folded note. His hands shook as he unfolded it. If you're reading this, then you're standing exactly where I once stood. You're probably angry.
Confused.
Maybe even disappointed. I understand. I felt all of those things. I wanted someone to tell me I could ignore everything and go back to normal. No one did. At the time, I thought they were being cruel. Years later, I realized they were giving me the greatest gift anyone ever could. The chance to discover that identity isn't as fragile as fear tells you it is. Wear this bracelet only if you decide to continue. Not because it belongs to me, because one day you'll give it to someone else. Ethan slowly turned the bracelet over. Tiny words were engraved inside. Strength begins with understanding. He read them again and again. For reasons he couldn't explain, those 4 words stayed with him. Strength begins with understanding. Not winning. Not proving. Understanding. He placed the bracelet around his wrist. Not because he had made a decision. Because he wanted to know why his father had treasured something so simple for nearly 20 years. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the old ballroom. No music played. No decorations filled the room. It wasn't a celebration. It felt more like the beginning of a promise. His grandmother stood in the center. Has anyone spoken to Ethan privately? Everyone answered together.
No.
She nodded.
Good.
Ethan frowned. What difference does that make? Every heir must choose, without persuasion. You've all been persuading me.
No.
She smiled. We've only answered your questions.
He realized she was right.
Not once had anyone begged him to continue. Not once had anyone threatened him. Every answer had come only after he asked. That realization somehow carried more weight than any argument could have. His grandmother unfolded the silk dress one final time. If you walk away today, we will still love you. His father nodded. You'll always be our son. His mother smiled through tears. Nothing changes that. His younger brother quietly added, but you'll never know what the rest of us know. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked from one face to another. Not fear. Not pressure. Only hope. Hope that he would understand. He finally spoke. If I say yes. His grandmother answered. The journey begins. If I say no. The conversation ends. He closed his eyes. Every logical part of him screamed that this was ridiculous. Yet another voice had grown louder with every passing hour. The voice of curiosity. Slowly, very slowly, he reached toward the dress. The room remained perfectly silent. His fingers touched the silk. It felt unexpectedly ordinary. Not magical. Not mysterious. Just fabric. He picked it up. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His grandmother smiled. Only one more question remains. What? Are you choosing because you're afraid to disappoint us? She paused. Or because you genuinely want the answer? Ethan thought about it. Longer than anyone expected. Finally, he looked directly into her eyes. I want the answer. For the first time since the ceremony began, his grandmother bowed her head. Then welcome. The first weeks were nothing like Ethan imagined. There were no dramatic speeches. No strange rituals. No mystical transformations. Instead, there were lessons. Practical ones. Walking with confidence instead of arrogance. Listening instead of preparing the next argument. Paying attention to expressions people usually ignored. His grandmother corrected tiny habits he had never noticed. You interrupt. I do not. You just interrupted me. He blinked. She smiled. Again. His father challenged him during conversations. What did your mother just say? I heard her. What did she say? He couldn't answer. His father nodded. Exactly. His mother gave him different advice. Notice who serves the food. Notice who clears the table. Notice who gets thanked. Simple observations slowly became impossible to ignore. Things he had never considered suddenly appeared everywhere. Not because the world had changed, because he had started paying attention. One afternoon, his grandmother led him into a room he had never entered before. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Thousands of journals filled the walls. What is this? The real family inheritance. He walked closer. Every journal carried a name. Edward, Thomas, William, Henry, Charles, Michael, Richard, his father. Each one had recorded an entire year. Read whichever you like. He randomly selected one. Halfway through the journal, he found a sentence underlined twice. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think someone is beneath them. Another journal. Respect offered only to powerful people isn't respect. It's strategy. Another. Never confuse being feared with being admired. Each journal contained lessons earned through experience rather than lectures. He lost track of time. Hours disappeared. When he finally looked outside, the sun had already begun setting. His grandmother was waiting by the door. What did you learn? He answered honestly, that every generation thought they understood people. And they were all wrong. She smiled. Good. Good. The moment you believe you finish learning about people. She gently closed the nearest journal. You stop deserving to lead them. Weeks later, Ethan noticed something unexpected. The fear he had felt at the beginning had started disappearing. Not because everything was easy, because he had stopped thinking about himself every second. Instead of worrying how people saw him, he found himself wondering how other people felt. The shift was almost invisible, yet it changed everything. One evening, he asked his father a question that had been bothering him. Did anyone ever quit? His father looked thoughtful. Once. What happened? He returned. How long later? 7 years. What changed his mind? His father smiled sadly. He spent 7 years believing the tradition had stolen something from him. And then he realized the only thing it had taken away. He looked at the old portraits lining the hallway. Was his certainty that he already knew everything. Ethan stood quietly. For the first time, he understood why every heir smiled in the hidden paintings. Not because the journey had been easy, because it had humbled them. And humility, he was beginning to realize, didn't make people smaller. It made them capable of becoming far greater than they had ever imagined. Months passed more quickly than Ethan expected. At first, he counted every single day, then every week. Eventually, he stopped counting altogether. Life had become too full, too unpredictable, too complicated. One rainy afternoon, his grandmother handed him a small notebook. No names. What? For the next 30 days, write down every moment someone surprises you. Why? Because people almost never fit the stories we invent about them. He shrugged. That sounds easy. She smiled knowingly. It isn't. The very first surprise came the next morning. A woman on the subway noticed Ethan struggling with several heavy shopping bags. Without saying a word, she stood up, carried 2 of them, and walked 3 stations before handing them back with a smile. She never asked for thanks. She simply left. Ethan wrote it down.
Day 1.
A stranger helped without expecting recognition. The second surprise came 2 days later. A businessman accidentally bumped into him while rushing through a crowded street. Ethan expected him to keep walking. Instead, the man stopped immediately. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" He waited until Ethan nodded before leaving. Day 3. Busy people can still choose kindness. The notebook slowly filled. Every page challenged another assumption. An elderly mechanic who fixed a broken bicycle for free. A teenage cashier who quietly paid for an elderly customer's groceries after her card was declined. A security guard who spent 20 minutes comforting a lost child before the parents arrived. Tiny moments, invisible to most people, impossible to forget once noticed. One evening, Ethan sat with his grandmother in the garden. "I think I understand now." She smiled. "Then tell me." "The tradition teaches empathy." She shook her head.
No.
He frowned. "No. It begins with empathy. Then what does it teach?" She looked toward the old oak tree standing in the center of the garden. "When storms come, which tree survives?" "The strongest one." She smiled.
No.
He looked confused. "The tree that bends." He watched the branches moving gently with the wind. "It survives because it refuses to confuse flexibility with weakness." She turned toward him. "Our family never wanted leaders who could dominate. We wanted leaders who could adapt." He thought about every journal he had read, every lesson, every conversation. They all pointed toward the same idea. Real strength wasn't stubbornness. It was understanding when to change. A few weeks later, Ethan experienced something that shook him more than anything before. He stopped at a small cafe after finishing several errands. The place was crowded. Every table was occupied except one. An elderly man sitting alone noticed him looking around. "You can sit here if you don't mind listening to an old man complain about coffee." Ethan laughed. "I think I can survive that." They talked for nearly an hour. About books, music, travel, family. Before leaving, the old man asked a strange question. "What do your parents do?" Ethan hesitated. For the first time in his life. He didn't mention the Ashford name. "They work very hard." The man nodded. "Good answer." "What do you mean?" "I've met too many people who introduce themselves using someone else's achievements." The words hit Ethan harder than the man could possibly know. As they stood to leave, the old man smiled. "You seem like someone still figuring out who you are." "I guess I am." "Don't rush." He gently patted Ethan's shoulder. The people who rush usually spend the rest of their lives correcting the mistakes they made while hurrying. When Ethan turned to thank him one last time, the man had already disappeared into the crowd. He never even learned his name, yet that conversation stayed with him for weeks. That evening, he wrote in his notebook, "People who know nothing about you often teach the most honest lessons." Winter arrived. Snow covered the old mansion. One night, the electricity suddenly failed. The entire house disappeared into darkness. His younger brother grabbed a flashlight. "This happened during Dad's year too." "It did." His father laughed. Almost exactly the same night, the family gathered around the fireplace. Without phones, without television, without distractions. His grandmother opened another journal. "This one belonged to your great-grandmother." "I thought only the heirs wrote them." "They did." "Then why hers?" She smiled. "Because every story has more than one perspective." Ethan leaned closer. The journal began with a sentence that made the room completely silent. "The hardest part wasn't watching my son change. The hardest part was realizing how little I had truly known him before." His grandmother continued reading. "For years, I believed I understood my child because I loved him. Love was never the problem. Assumption was. I answered questions he never asked. I solved problems he never wanted solved. I imagined dreams he never had. Only after the tradition did we finally begin speaking honestly. I did not lose a son. I gained the privilege of truly knowing my child. Ethan slowly looked toward his mother. She quietly wiped away a tear. I understand that journal now. He reached across the room and held her hand. So, do I. By the beginning of spring, Ethan had almost forgotten the frightened young man who had stood in front of the mirror months earlier. He wasn't fearless now. He was simply less controlled by fear. His grandmother noticed the change before anyone else. You've stopped asking the wrong question. What wrong question? What will people think of me? He smiled. I guess I have. And what question are you asking now? He thought for a moment. What kind of person do I want to become? She nodded proudly. Now your real education begins. The next lesson surprised him. His father handed him several folders. What are these? Applications. For what? Scholarships. I don't need scholarships. His father looked directly at him. Ethan Ashford doesn't. But for this year. He pushed the folders closer. You're not Ethan Ashford. Ethan understood immediately. You want me to compete like everyone else?
No.
I want you to discover whether your abilities exist without our family name. That challenge scared him more than anything before. For the first time in his life, no doors would open because of who his family was. Every opportunity would depend entirely on him. He spent weeks preparing, writing essays, attending interviews, answering difficult questions. Nobody recognized his surname. Nobody treated him differently. Every success felt earned. Every rejection taught something valuable. One afternoon, a letter finally arrived. He had been accepted into one of the country's most competitive leadership programs. Not because he was an Ashford, because strangers believed in his work. He stared at the acceptance letter for several minutes before smiling. It felt different. Different from every achievement he'd ever celebrated. His father found him standing by the window. You got in. Ethan nodded silently. His father didn't ask to see the letter. Instead, he asked something else. How does it feel? Ethan looked down at the paper, then back at his father. For the first time, he smiled. I don't feel like I'm borrowing someone else's success. His father laughed. Exactly. That night, nobody threw a party. Nobody made speeches. His grandmother simply added another journal to the library shelf, the empty one waiting for Ethan. Its cover contained only his name. She placed a fountain pen beside it. You've spent months reading everyone else's story. She smiled warmly. It's time to start writing your own. Ethan stared at the blank journal for a long time. The pages were perfectly clean. No advice. No wisdom. No history. Just empty paper waiting for a story that had not happened yet. His grandmother stood beside him. Why is it blank already? Because your lessons are not ours. But everyone else wrote after they finished. She smiled. They started long before they realized they had. He opened the first page. For several minutes, he couldn't think of anything to write. Finally, he wrote one sentence. Today I realized learning begins the moment certainty ends. He closed the journal. His grandmother nodded. A good beginning. Only a beginning. The best stories always are. Several weeks later, Ethan received an invitation unlike anything he had expected. It came in a plain, white envelope. No family seal. No expensive stationery. Only a handwritten note. If you believe you've learned enough, meet me at the old train station on Saturday at noon. Come alone. No signature. He showed the note to his father. Instead of looking surprised, his father smiled. It finally arrived. You knew about this? I received the same letter. So, did your grandfather. Who sends it? His father shook his head. I can't answer. You don't know? I do. Then tell me. I wasn't told. What does that mean? You'll understand after Saturday. Ethan laughed. You people really love mysteries. His father grinned. Apparently. Saturday arrived with heavy clouds hanging low over the city. The old train station had been abandoned for decades. Broken windows. Rusted tracks. Echoes of another time. Ethan walked inside. No one was there. At exactly noon, A voice echoed behind him. You came. He turned. An elderly woman stood near the platform. Simple clothes, walking cane, bright eyes. She looked familiar somehow. I know you. She smiled.
No.
You know my face. She handed him a faded photograph. His breath caught. It was the hidden portrait from the mansion. Edward, or rather, Eleanor, standing beside another young woman. The woman now standing before him. Impossible. You. She nodded. I've been waiting a very long time to meet the next heir. That photograph is over 100 years old. It is. Then how are you? She laughed softly. I'm not the woman in the photograph. Relief washed over him. Then she added, I'm her granddaughter. He exhaled. You almost gave me a heart attack. Good. What? You should never stop questioning impossible things. She sat on an old wooden bench. Tell me. What have you learned? Ethan thought carefully. People are more complicated than first impressions. She nodded. What else? Power without empathy becomes dangerous.
Good.
What else? He hesitated. I don't know. She smiled. Excellent. What? The most dangerous student is the one who thinks they know everything. She reached into an old leather bag. Inside were dozens of newspapers dating back nearly a century. Read the headlines. He looked through them. Ashford Foundation saves hundreds during flood. Ashford Company rejects child labor despite financial loss. Anonymous family donates fortune during economic crisis. Community hospital opens without government funding. Every article praised the Ashford family. So, she gently tapped the newspapers. Read the names. He looked again. None of the articles mentioned the family patriarch. Instead, every major decision had been announced by someone named Eleanor Ashford. His eyes widened. Wait. He turned another page. Another Eleanor.
Different year.
Different face. Another article. Another Eleanor. Again. 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 He looked at the elderly woman. Every heir. She nodded. Use the same name. Why? Because the world never needed another famous family. It needed one lasting promise. He looked down again. For over a century, every firstborn heir had quietly adopted the same public identity during the tradition. Not for fame, for continuity. One promise stretching across generations. Nobody ever noticed? Oh, people noticed. They simply assumed Eleanor Ashford was the daughter of whoever came before. Ethan suddenly understood why the family had protected the secret so carefully. The tradition wasn't about hiding. It was about allowing every generation to contribute to something bigger than themselves. No individual received all the credit. The promise did. As they walked through the abandoned station, the elderly woman stopped beside an old clock frozen at exactly 12. Do you know why you're here? To learn the secret?
No.
She shook her head. To make a choice. I already made one.
No.
You accepted the beginning. Today you choose the ending. He frowned. I don't understand. She looked directly into his eyes. Your year is almost over. And you may now tell the world everything. I can. You may.
She paused.
Or you may protect the promise for another generation. Why would anyone keep it secret? Because once people chase attention, they often stop chasing purpose. He remained silent. She continued. If the tradition becomes famous, people will argue about clothing. They'll argue about appearances. They'll argue about politics. They'll miss the lesson completely. The realization hit him like a wave. She was right. The entire internet would become obsessed with the surface. Almost nobody would ask why the tradition existed. That evening, Ethan returned to the mansion. His family waited in the library. His grandmother looked at him only once before asking, You met her? I did. What did she ask? What ending I wanted? His grandmother smiled. And Ethan looked around the room. At the journals, the hidden portraits, the generations of quiet sacrifice. He finally understood why no one had ever revealed the truth. Some lessons couldn't simply be explained. They had to be experienced. I won't tell anyone. His younger brother looked surprised. Really? Ethan nodded. If people hear the story, they'll debate the tradition. They'll never understand the transformation. His father smiled with unmistakable pride.
For the first time.
He wasn't proud because Ethan had obeyed. He was proud because Ethan had reached the conclusion on his own. That night, Ethan wrote another sentence in his journal. The greatest truths lose their value when they become performances. Some promises survive because they are lived instead of advertised. He closed the journal. Outside, rain began falling. Exactly as it had on the day everything began. Only this time, he smiled when he heard it, because now he understood why every heir remembered the rain. Not because it marked the day they changed clothes. Because it marked the day they stopped trying to become the person everyone expected and started becoming the person the world actually needed. Just before midnight, someone knocked gently on the library door. His younger brother stepped inside, holding a small wooden box. The bracelet? Ethan asked. His brother nodded. Grandmother said I should keep it safe. Ethan looked at the silver bracelet on his wrist. Slowly, he removed it and placed it into the box. His brother frowned. But your journey just ended. Ethan smiled.
No.
He looked toward the long hallway of portraits. It only feels that way. His grandmother appeared in the doorway with the faintest smile. The first lesson took 1 year.
She paused.
The second lasts the rest of your life. For the first time since his 18th birthday, Ethan wasn't wondering what tradition expected from him. He was wondering how many lives he could quietly improve before someone else opened that same wooden box. And without another word, he picked up his journal, turned to the next blank page, and began writing the future. The morning after Ethan placed the bracelet back into the wooden box, he expected life to return to normal. Instead, it became more complicated than ever. For the first time in a year, he was allowed to introduce himself as Ethan Ashford again. He expected that to feel familiar. It didn't. People congratulated him. Employees welcomed him into the family company. Board members shook his hand. Lawyers prepared documents. Executives filled conference rooms waiting to meet the future head of the Ashford Foundation. Everything he had imagined since childhood was finally happening. Yet something felt strangely different. A year earlier, he would have walked into those rooms believing everyone needed to hear his opinion. Now he entered wondering how many voices had gone unheard before he arrived. His first board meeting began exactly at 9. 23 people sat around a polished oak table. Most were twice his age. Some had worked for the family longer than he had been alive. As Ethan entered, everyone stood. The respect was immediate, automatic, expected. It made him uncomfortable. His grandfather's chair remained empty at the end of the table. Although retired years earlier, it had never been replaced. His father whispered, "Today you sit there." Ethan slowly walked toward the chair. His hand rested on its carved wooden back. He remembered something the elderly woman at the train station had said. People often mistake position for purpose. He looked around the room. Instead of sitting, he quietly moved the chair away from the head of the table. Several executives exchanged confused looks. He carried it to the middle. "What are you doing?" one director asked. Ethan smiled. "If we're solving problems together." He placed the chair between everyone else. "Then I shouldn't sit farther away than anyone else." The room became silent. His father lowered his head, hiding a smile. His grandmother, watching through the glass from the hallway, quietly closed her eyes for a moment. Not because Ethan had followed tradition, because he had created his own. The meeting began. The first hour was exactly what Ethan expected. Financial reports, budgets, construction projects, investments. Numbers filled every page. Then one presentation changed everything. A manager proudly announced a proposal. If we relocate the factory, profits increase by 18%. Several board members nodded immediately. The graphs looked impressive. The calculations were flawless. A year earlier, Ethan would have approved it within minutes. Instead, he asked one question. "How many families work there?" The room fell quiet. The manager blinked. "I'm sorry." "The current factory. How many families depend on those jobs? We didn't calculate that. Ethan nodded. I thought not. He looked around the room. What happens to the employees? They can apply elsewhere. How many will actually find work? Silence. What happens to the local schools if hundreds of parents lose income? Nobody answered. What happens to the small businesses near the factory? Still nothing. The numbers on the screen suddenly looked incomplete. Not wrong. Incomplete. Ethan closed the presentation. We're postponing this decision. One executive objected immediately. It will cost millions. Ethan looked at him calmly. Then we'll spend millions finding a better solution. Another director frowned. Our competitors won't hesitate. Perhaps. Ethan replied. But I refuse to measure success only by the numbers easiest to count. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, unexpectedly, the oldest board member slowly began clapping. Everyone turned toward him. He had served under Ethan's grandfather, then his father, now Ethan. The old man smiled. I've waited 32 years to hear someone ask that question. After the meeting, the elderly director stopped Ethan in the hallway. I knew your grandfather. So I've heard. He asked exactly the same question during his first meeting. Ethan smiled. Really? The old man nodded. Your father asked it too. He paused. But there was one difference. What difference? You asked before anyone reminded you. The words stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. A week later, another challenge arrived. The Ashford Foundation announced a scholarship interview. Hundreds of students applied. The final decision rested with Ethan. Stacks of applications covered his desk. Awards. Perfect grades. Recommendations. Impressive achievements. One application looked ordinary. Average grades. No famous competitions. No expensive schools. Most board members ignored it. Ethan almost did too. Then, he noticed one handwritten sentence. I never had enough opportunities to become exceptional, but I never wasted the opportunities one was given. He read the application again. 3 times. The student worked nights, helped raise younger siblings, cared for an ill grandmother, still managed to graduate. No trophies, just perseverance. The interview day arrived. Dozens of candidates entered one by one. Most delivered polished speeches. Perfect answers. Perfect confidence. Then the final applicant entered. The same student. Nervous. Hands shaking. Apologizing every few minutes. Halfway through the interview, the student suddenly stopped speaking. I'm sorry. For what? I forgot everything I prepared. Ethan smiled. Good. The student looked confused. Why good? Because now I get to meet the real you. The room relaxed immediately. The rehearsed answers disappeared. Honest conversation began. An hour later, the interview ended. The board expected Ethan to choose one of the brilliant top-ranked applicants. Instead, he chose the nervous student. Some directors protested. The scores weren't high enough. The achievements weren't remarkable. The resume is average. Ethan quietly replied, No. He held up the application. The opportunities were average. The determination was extraordinary. News of the decision spread quickly. Some newspapers praised it. Others criticized it. Social media exploded with arguments. People who had never met the student confidently declared whether the choice was fair. Ethan watched the debates without responding. His younger brother walked into the office carrying his phone. Everyone wants your statement. Ethan looked up. Do they? Thousands of comments. You should answer. Ethan smiled. If people already decided what they believe. He returned to reading another application. They're probably not waiting to hear the truth. His brother laughed. You're becoming impossible. I learned from grandmother. That's exactly what worries me. Both of them laughed. Months passed. The company changed in small ways. Nothing dramatic. Just hundreds of tiny decisions. Meeting schedules adjusted so parents could attend school events. Scholarships expanded into rural communities. Factories redesigned with employee suggestions. Anonymous feedback boxes actually received replies. Visitors noticed something unusual. Productivity increased. Employee turnover dropped. Profits eventually grew anyway, not despite treating people well. Partly because of it. One afternoon, the elderly board member returned with a dusty wooden folder. "I think it's yours." "What is it?" "I was told to give this only when the heir stopped trying to impress everyone." Ethan opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature. Only one sentence. "If you are reading this, then your family no longer needs to teach you the tradition. Now it is your responsibility to protect its purpose." Ethan stared at the words for several moments.
He suddenly realized something.
The tradition had never truly been about one person. It wasn't even about the Ashford family. It was about ensuring that, generation after generation, someone in a position of power remembered what it felt like to see the world through someone else's eyes. He carefully folded the paper and placed it back inside the folder. Outside his office window, rain began falling once again. He smiled. Somehow, every turning point in his life seemed to arrive with rain. And for the first time, he welcomed the storm. Years passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just one ordinary day after another. Ethan eventually realized that the most important changes in life rarely happened all at once. They happened so gradually that you only noticed them when you looked back. The mansion was quieter now. His younger brother had graduated from university. His father spent more time in the gardens than in board meetings. His grandmother's hair had turned completely silver. Yet every evening, without fail, she still walked through the long hallway of portraits. Sometimes she stopped in front of one for several minutes. Sometimes she simply smiled and continued walking. One evening Ethan joined her. "You always come here." "I do."
"Why?"
She looked at the hidden portraits behind the walls. "To remind myself that people are never only what the world sees." Ethan nodded. "I think I finally understand." She laughed softly.
"No."
He smiled. "No. You understand more than you did." She touched his shoulder. "But never believe you've reached the end. The moment you think you've finished learning about people." She looked back toward the portraits. "Someone will surprise you." A month later, that prediction came true. A young employee requested a private meeting. The assistant tried to cancel it several times. "The schedule is full. The CEO is busy. The matter can be handled by human resources." When Ethan heard about it, he asked only one question. "What is the employee's name?" Nobody knew. The assistant looked embarrassed. "I never ask." Ethan stood immediately. "Find them." 20 minutes later, a nervous young worker entered the office. He couldn't have been older than 22. His hands shook so badly, he nearly dropped his folder. "I'm sorry for bothering you." "You're not bothering me. I know people usually don't meet with someone like me." Ethan smiled. "Neither did I." The young man looked confused. "What?" "There was a time when nobody thought someone like me deserved to be heard either." He motioned toward the chair. "Sit." For the next hour, the employee explained a simple idea. A small change to the production system. Nothing revolutionary. Just a smarter process that reduced waste. Managers had rejected it for months. Not because it was wrong. Because it came from someone too junior to matter. Ethan listened carefully. Then he asked the engineering department to test it. 3 weeks later, the results were extraordinary. The company saved millions. The idea spread to every factory. At the next executive meeting, Ethan placed a small nameplate in the center of the conference table. "What is that?" a director asked. Ethan smiled. "It belongs to whoever has the best idea." No assigned seat. No permanent owner. Just one simple reminder. The best ideas rarely cared about job titles. From that day forward, every meeting changed. Junior employees spoke more often. Executives listened more carefully. Innovation increased. Not because smarter people had been hired, because quieter voices had finally been heard. That winter, Ethan found his grandmother sitting alone in the library. The fire crackled softly. She held Edward's original journal in her hands. "The pages are getting fragile. They're over a century old." She nodded. "So am I." He laughed. "You don't look a century old." "I feel older some mornings." They both smiled. After a long silence, she asked, "Do you know what frightened me most about our tradition?" "You were afraid people would reject it?"
"No."
"Then what?" "I was afraid someone would continue it without understanding it." Ethan looked at the journals surrounding them. Happened before? She nodded slowly. Once. What happened? The heir copied every rule, wore every dress, read every journal, completed every ceremony. She paused, but learned nothing. How is that possible? He obeyed. She closed the journal, but he never listened. The words settled heavily in the room. Did the family stop him? We couldn't. Why not? Because wisdom can't be forced. She smiled sadly. It can only be invited. Ethan thought about that long after the conversation ended. Several days later, he received another anonymous letter. This time, there was no mystery, no invitation, just one sentence. The final lesson cannot be taught. It must be discovered. No signature, no explanation. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. For weeks he wondered what it meant. Then life answered. One snowy evening, Ethan was driving home after visiting one of the foundation schools. Traffic suddenly stopped. Far ahead, flashing emergency lights painted the road red and blue. People climbed out of their cars. A bus had slid off the icy road into a shallow river. Without thinking, Ethan ran. Several strangers were already climbing into the freezing water. Nobody asked who anyone was. Nobody cared. Business owners, construction workers, university students, parents, teenagers, complete strangers, working together, breaking windows, pulling children to safety, holding ropes, wrapping coats around people they had never met. For nearly an hour, everyone did whatever they could. When the last passenger reached shore safely, exhausted applause broke out. Not for one person, for everyone. Later that night, the news reported the rescue. Television stations searched for a hero. Interviews, photographs, awards. Journalists eventually found Ethan. You helped save several passengers. We like to feature your story. Ethan looked behind him, at dozens of ordinary people quietly returning home.
No.
The reporter frowned. What do you mean? You've chosen the wrong story. We have eyewitnesses. They saw one person. I saw 50. He pointed toward the crowd. The mechanic who broke the window. The nurse who treated injuries. The teenager who jumped into freezing water without hesitation. The truck driver who blocked traffic. The grandmother comforting frightened children. He smiled gently. If you make one person the hero, you'll ignore everyone else who made the miracle possible. The interview ended there. The next day's headline surprised him. Not because his name appeared, because it didn't. Instead, it simply read, "Neighbors save bus full of children." He folded the newspaper with a quiet smile. Some victories didn't need a face. They only needed to inspire the next act of kindness. That evening, Ethan found his grandmother waiting in the portrait hallway. She held the silver bracelet in one hand. I saw the news. So did I. She handed him the bracelet. I think it belongs with you a little longer. I thought I was supposed to pass it on. You will. She looked toward the oldest portrait, but not yet. When? She smiled. You'll know. Ethan slipped the bracelet back onto his wrist. For the first time, he noticed how worn the silver had become. Tiny scratches covered every surface. Each generation had left invisible marks. None erased the others. They simply became part of the same story. He suddenly understood. The bracelet wasn't valuable because it was old. It was valuable because every person who wore it had added something without taking anything away. Just like the tradition. Just like the journals. Just like the family. Just like life itself. And somewhere deep inside, a thought crossed his mind that made him stop walking. One day, another 18-year-old would stand in front of the same mirror. Another folded dress would wait on the same chair. Another frightened voice would ask, "Why me?" When that day finally came, would he be ready to answer? He wasn't sure. But unlike the young man who had once tried to escape through the locked front door, he was no longer afraid of questions whose answers required time. Because some answers could never be given. They had to be lived. Years passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just one ordinary day after another. Ethan eventually realized that the most important changes in life rarely happened all at once. They happened so gradually that you only noticed them when you looked back. The mansion was quieter now. His younger brother had graduated from university. His father spent more time in the gardens than in board meetings. His grandmother's hair had turned completely silver. Yet every evening, without fail, she still walked through the long hallway of portraits. Sometimes she stopped in front of one for several minutes. Sometimes she simply smiled and continued walking. One evening Ethan joined her. "You always come here." "I do." "Why?" She looked at the hidden portraits behind the walls. "To remind myself that people are never only what the world sees." Ethan nodded. "I think I finally understand." She laughed softly.
No.
He smiled. "No. You understand more than you did." She touched his shoulder. "But never believe you've reached the end. The moment you think you've finished learning about people." She looked back toward the portraits. "Someone will surprise you." A month later, that prediction came true. A young employee requested a private meeting. The assistant tried to cancel it several times. "The schedule is full. The CEO is busy. The matter can be handled by human resources." When Ethan heard about it, he asked only one question. "What is the employee's name?" Nobody knew. The assistant looked embarrassed. "I never ask." Ethan stood immediately. "Find them." 20 minutes later, a nervous young worker entered the office. He couldn't have been older than 22. His hands shook so badly, he nearly dropped his folder. "I'm sorry for bothering you." "You're not bothering me. I know people usually don't meet with someone like me." Ethan smiled. "Neither did I." The young man looked confused. "What?" "There was a time when nobody thought someone like me deserved to be heard either." He motioned toward the chair. "Sit." For the next hour, the employee explained a simple idea. A small change to the production system. Nothing revolutionary, just a smarter process that reduced waste. Managers had rejected it for months. Not because it was wrong, because it came from someone too junior to matter. Ethan listened carefully. Then he asked the engineering department to test it. 3 weeks later, the results were extraordinary. The company saved millions. The idea spread to every factory. At the next executive meeting, Ethan placed a small nameplate in the center of the conference table. "What is that?" a director asked. Ethan smiled. "It belongs to whoever has the best idea." No assigned seat. No permanent owner. Just one simple reminder. The best ideas rarely cared about job titles. From that day forward, every meeting changed. Junior employees spoke more often. Executives listened more carefully. Innovation increased. Not because smarter people had been hired, because quieter voices had finally been heard. That winter, Ethan found his grandmother sitting alone in the library. The fire crackled softly. She held Edward's original journal in her hands. "The pages are getting fragile. They're over a century old." She nodded. "So am I." He laughed. "You don't look a century old." "I feel older some mornings." They both smiled. After a long silence, she asked, "Do you know what frightened me most about our tradition?" "You were afraid people would reject it?" "No." "Then what?" "I was afraid someone would continue it without understanding it." Ethan looked at the journals surrounding them. "Happened before?" She nodded slowly. "Once." "What happened?" "The heir copied every rule. Wore every dress. Read every journal. Completed every ceremony." She paused. "But learned nothing." "How is that possible?" He obeyed. She closed the journal. But he never listened. The words settled heavily in the room. Did the family stop him? "We couldn't." "Why not?" "Because wisdom can't be forced." She smiled sadly. "It can only be invited." Ethan thought about that long after the conversation ended. Several days later, he received another anonymous letter. This time there was no mystery. No invitation. Just one sentence. "The final lesson cannot be taught. It must be discovered." No signature. No explanation. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. For weeks he wondered what it meant. Then life answered. One snowy evening, Ethan was driving home after visiting one of the foundation schools. Traffic suddenly stopped. Far ahead, flashing emergency lights painted the road red and blue. People climbed out of their cars. A bus had slid off the icy road into a shallow river. Without thinking, Ethan ran. Several strangers were already climbing into the freezing water. Nobody asked who anyone was. Nobody cared. Business owners, construction workers, university students, parents, teenagers, complete strangers, working together, breaking windows, pulling children to safety, holding ropes, wrapping coats around people they had never met. For nearly an hour, everyone did whatever they could. When the last passenger reached shore safely, exhausted applause broke out. Not for one person. For everyone. Later that night, the news reported the rescue. Television stations searched for a hero. Interviews, photographs, awards. Journalists eventually found Ethan. You helped save several passengers. We'd like to feature your story. Ethan looked behind him, at dozens of ordinary people quietly returning home.
No.
The reporter frowned. What do you mean? You've chosen the wrong story. We have eyewitnesses. They saw one person. I saw 50. He pointed toward the crowd. The mechanic who broke the window. The nurse who treated injuries. The teenager who jumped into freezing water without hesitation. The truck driver who blocked traffic. The grandmother comforting frightened children. He smiled gently. If you make one person the hero, you'll ignore everyone else who made the miracle possible. The interview ended there. The next day's headline surprised him. Not because his name appeared, because it didn't. Instead, it simply read, "Neighbors save bus full of children." He folded the newspaper with a quiet smile. Some victories didn't need a face. They only needed to inspire the next act of kindness. That evening, Ethan found his grandmother waiting in the portrait hallway. She held the silver bracelet in one hand. I saw the news. So did I. She handed him the bracelet. I think it belongs with you a little longer. I thought I was supposed to pass it on. You will. She looked toward the oldest portrait. But not yet. When? She smiled. You'll know. Ethan slipped the bracelet back onto his wrist. For the first time, he noticed how worn the silver had become. Tiny scratches covered every surface. Each generation had left invisible marks. None erased the others. They simply became part of the same story. He suddenly understood. The bracelet wasn't valuable because it was old. It was valuable because every person who wore it had added something without taking anything away.
Just like the tradition.
Just like the journals.
Just like the family.
Just like life itself. And somewhere deep inside, a thought crossed his mind that made him stop walking. One day, another 18-year-old would stand in front of the same mirror. Another folded dress would wait on the same chair. Another frightened voice would ask, "Why me?" When that day finally came, would he be ready to answer? He wasn't sure. But unlike the young man who had once tried to escape through the locked front door, he was no longer afraid of questions whose answers required time. Because some answers could never be given. They had to be lived.